All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Next Man Up podcast. I'm your host, Banning and Colin, and I'm here with my co-host, Colin Martin.
How's it going?
And we got a lot to talk about today in basketball, football, NBA, NCAA basketball, the NFL draft. So I think we just got to start off with the NBA. Right before we're going into the playoffs, let's just talk about we don't have the official seeding as of right now. We will next week, but we got some topics to talk about first. I want to talk about the Western Conference. It seems like we're talking about that every week, but I mean, until we have the final seeding, it's going to change a lot. So just looking at this first, as of right now, we have the Clippers at 5, the Warriors at 6, the Lakers at 7, the Pelicans at 8, the Timberwolves at 9, and the Thunder at 10, with the Mavericks being the first team out of the play-in. So just looking at this at face value, it's going to change a lot. But the first thing I want to talk about is the Mavericks. We've been talking about their decline for the past few weeks. We weren't completely worried the first week, but ever since then, it's got even worse. Now they're officially out of the play-in tournament with only a few games left. What do you make of this to start off?
I mean, we talk about it every week now. The Mavericks have been slipping and slipping. Some people attribute it to the Kyrie Irving trade. Some people, like me and you on the last episode, throw a lot of blame at Jason Kidd. It's just disappointing, I think, at the end of the day. But we also have to consider the West has been so tight. It's not like they're playing that bad. It's just there's a lot of teams jumping them. They got cold at the worst possible time in the West. I mean, a team like the Pelicans, they just went on a 7-1 run record-wise. The Lakers have been great. The Warriors have really been starting to figure it out, and Andrew Wiggins is on the way back. So, I mean, if you're the Mavericks, you couldn't have afforded to get cold right now. And I think this kind of wraps up your season. Of course, they're saying they're going to bring Kyrie back next year. That's the goal. But, I mean, unfortunately, I think the season's kind of a wash if you're Dallas.
Yeah. I know you talked about the kind of the blame on who you put it on. One person you left out, though, that people are talking about is Luka. There's kind of two sides of the coin, though, because obviously averaging almost 33 points a game, that helps a lot. But on the defensive end, with that backcourt, we talked about it a little bit when that trade first happened. Obviously, that was going to be an issue. But the glaring issue overall with this team, and I've said it, I mean, it seems like every time the Mavs have played a game in the past week, I make a TikTok about it, talking about how bad they performed. But you look at the box score from every single game, and the big man presence, there's none at all. And I mean, that's going to be a struggle for them if they do end up sneaking into the play-in game. If they play against the Lakers, AD is going to drop 40 on them. The rest of, I mean, the other teams in there too, the Timberwolves, those two big men going to drop a lot of points on them. The Pelicans too, Brandon Ingram. There's no big men presence at all. Christian Wood can have good games off the bench, but they don't even know who they're starting. Pretty much any small forward, power forward, or center is, because each game, I mean, the hottest that a player gets is maybe they drop 15 points, but you can't have that being your best game.
Well, I remember before the season, everybody was having big news because Kidd said he was going to start JaVale over Christian Wood. And now we're at a point where, they're 37 and 42 and they don't even have a rotation figured out. They really don't. It depends on the night who's even playing. JaVale McGee's barely played all season despite being healthy. Comes in randomly the other night and chokes the free throws. And that's not a diss on JaVale McGee. It's that how are you going to bring someone in as a starter and not even play them? And how are you going to make, these grand decisions with your rotation and not even figure it out when we're at this point in the season? And your team should be in the playoffs easily. This should not be a play-in team. I think there's just so much going around the Mavericks right now. And, everybody's issue when they traded for Kyrie was that he was going to bring drama. The drama around Dallas right now has nothing to do with Kyrie. It has everything to do with the team is choking, selling expectations. And despite Luka having a really good season, he hasn't done enough to bring the team forward. Whatever you think that may be, they should not be an 11th seed in the West right now.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this, I think 4 months now, down by 10 points with less than a minute left, and then Luka ends up bringing that team by himself to a 60-point triple-double overtime win in probably one of the greatest games ever. And then they trade for a superstar, and somehow it got worse, which usually we don't see that often. I mean, last year even with the Sixers when they got James Harden, they didn't obviously perform in the playoffs, but they didn't fall out of the playoffs completely. Like they had a, I think 90 something percent chance to make the playoffs less than 2 months ago. And now they might not even make the play in game.
Yeah, and it's super disappointing. But so bringing on to the next point, I mean, we have the Lakers, who, in my opinion, has shifted on them quite a bit, and you've been riding with them most of the way so far. How much noise do you think the Lakers can actually make in the playoffs this year?
As of right now, they're the seventh seed, but they're only half a game out. They play the Warriors tonight as we record this, and then the Clippers again. So they could make their way into the fifth seed. If I'm the Lakers, I think the best case scenario, you end up as a sixth seed and you play the Kings. I would rather play the Kings than the Suns. I don't think that's a hot take for any team. I'm not just specifically talking about the Lakers, but I really like the Lakers matchup against the Kings. And honestly, I'll say it now on record. I think if they play the Kings in the first round, I wouldn't be surprised if they win that series.
I have mixed feelings about that. For me, I do think the Lakers could get a first round matchup that they like. If you ask me personally, and I know this seems a little weird, I would rather have them play the Grizzlies if I'm the Lakers. You know, we all know John Morant coming back, and that's a really strong Grizzlies team. But I like some of the matchups, especially with AD. I think he handles Jaren Jackson Jr., who isn't much of an offensive threat, but I mean, you look at any of these other first round matchups he would eat. So I think they go like player for player in that matchup. The Kings are tough because I understand that they might not be as scary like roster wise, but the Kings have played really good against the Lakers all year. So I could see it going either way. If the Lakers make it out of the first round, which I don't predict they do, but if they make it out of the first, I mean, that's a team that can go all the way. If you get LeBron out of the first round, you never know what can happen. And with AD playing so good, I mean, in the last week, the Lakers were like undefeated and AD was averaging 35 or something ridiculous like that. You know, when AD's playing like this, then LeBron gets to take a back seat. LeBron gets to drop 18 and still win the game, stuff like that. That's when the Lakers are scary to me. Not when LeBron's at his best, when the rest of the guys are really on it.
Yeah, people are talking about too LeBron scoring efficiency. He has to bring that up in the playoffs. He's going to. It's not like a matter of when or if. It's just going to happen. He's playing in regular season games, like you said. He only needs to drop 18 points, 18-point triple double, and AD drops 40 points. LeBron, the best point for LeBron right now, and this is how they've wanted the Lakers to be for the past few years, and it worked in that championship season. That championship season, LeBron led the league in assists, and I feel like that people just like completely forget that. And that team overall was great. He was second in MVP voting, and he led the league in assists because he was able to pass the ball to the guys around him on the Lakers team. But since everyone kind of left and they were in limbo, and we didn't really know how the Lakers would look between AD and LeBron kind of had to be that second option. Obviously, he can still score, but he's going to thrive at this point in his career when he can give it to Anthony Davis in the post. And if AD gets double teamed, they can kick it out and pass it to the shooters. That's how they won the championship. And the pieces are there this year with Austin Reeves getting hot, D'Angelo Russell, a little bit of an injury. I think he'll be fine by playoff time, especially by the first round. But like you said, I think if they make it past the first round, they're going to be scary. I guess bringing that up, if they make it past the first round, they would end up playing the Nuggets. I know a few weeks ago, you said that Nuggets would destroy them. Has your opinion changed?
No, no, not at all. I don't think the Lakers are a team that wins in the first round, straight up. Like they would have to get a pretty favorable matchup. If they do and they play the Nuggets, which would be in this scenario, no, not at all. The Nuggets are just a better team. And as we just mentioned, AD's hot at the right time, which in turn makes LeBron even scarier. To me, I would still take the Nuggets. I mean, we just showcased how LeBron got an 18-point triple double and, all excited about it. And I'm not shitting on your point, but that's a pretty good LeBron game. That's like a really bad Jokic game, just to put it in layman's terms. I think they match up well. I don't know who's stopping Michael Porter Jr. on the perimeter. Same with Jamal Murray. I just like the matchup too much.
Yeah, but I don't know who's going to stop Anthony Davis
I
because it's not going
I
to be
don't
Jokic.
Yeah, but if the options stop Anthony Davis or stop Jokic, I take Jokic is a better player than Anthony Davis.
I think it would go I don't think they would sweep them if they end up playing.
I think maximum 5 games. I don't think that's a series that goes to 6.
We'll just have to wait and see. So another team that I want to talk about in the West is the Pelicans. So they've been an interesting team. Obviously, going into the playoffs, they've been looking really well. Went on a 7-1 stretch, second best you can do in 8 games. So this team has been looking really good. One thing I want to talk about besides the playoffs is Zion Williamson. Recently, people have been talking about potentially moving on from Zion in the offseason. How do you feel about this? Obviously, with a guy that they invested a lot in, but is very injury prone.
Yeah, I mean, you just brought up my main point. It's just it's too much of an investment. At this point, this would probably be the worst Zion's, trade market would ever be. Because like around his draft day, teams would trade like 6 first rounders to get him. You can't really trade a dude at the bottom of what you can get back for him. They're at a point right now where you've invested so much. If you move on, you're not gonna get back what you invested in the first place. If we can be honest, I think Zion is difficult because he's not available. And if you could go back and maybe take a guy like John Morant, I know he's had his stuff, but he's been available and really good. Maybe they do that, but you can't. You have to stick to your guns. One, him and Bi play together; they're really good. But we've seen with him and Brandon Ingram and pretty much everybody on that team, they're not always available. But at the end of the day, I mean, you can't. It's kind of in limbo because you can't get rid of them because they're good. It's just kind of hoping they get healthy, hoping the time's right. In a couple of years, maybe it's time to move on, but you got to keep Zion on your team for now.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing I want to bring up, he's only going to be 23 next year. And another guy who missed a few of his first years and then played his first full year at age 23 was Embiid. And a lot of people, I mean, in that situation too, investing a high pick in a guy that would have injury concerns. But if you look at Zion Williamson, and obviously he's not going to have the same career path as Embiid. I mean, I think he definitely has the potential to, but it's going to be obviously a different scenario. But the point that I'm getting at is he's going to be 23 next season. And if he can be healthy for the full season, then I think obviously you have to completely invest in him. He's going to be looking for an extension and you can't give up on him. And a guy like Embiid that came in for his first full season at 23 years old, Zion at 23 years old has way more potential than Embiid. Embiid had a good amount of potential, but he's been able to grow on the court as he played. Zion was already an amazing player coming out of high school, already the best player in college at his time. Some would argue one of the best players ever in college. Obviously, that first season was very good, but you can't give up on him this early. I think people forget that when he's on the court, he's like a generational talent. He can do pretty much everything. And obviously, you're going to have to worry about the injuries. But if the Bulls are still invested in Lonzo Ball, and I'm a big Lonzo Ball fan, you can't give up on Zion at this point.
No, and I agree.
So the next thing that we'll talk about in the NBA is recently we've heard some news online that I've been reading. There's a lot of people concerned about the Sixers in the playoffs after the Bucks loss. One thing I want to get out of the way is that they still ended the series tied, the season series 2-2. And the Bucks beat them in one game, and everyone was freaking out that the Sixers won't be able to compete in the playoffs. But as we see tonight, this is probably the biggest game of the season right now for the Sixers. They're going to be playing the Celtics, and they're 0-3. One of the games could have went either way. Obviously, Embiid kind of half a second away from going to overtime, but they still did lose that game. But I want to ask you, do you think they can still compete in the East even after all this noise that's been coming out?
Yeah, and as much as I want to come up here and say no and say the Sixers suck, they absolutely can compete. It's not necessarily you got to remember the things too. Like they're going to go in and first round they're not playing the Celtics, they're not playing the Bucks. They're going to catch a team like the Nets, like the Heat that they're going to handle pretty well. They go in, they win a series there, then anything can happen in the playoffs. It's a bit of a projection, but the Sixers more than anything handle business, and then they're going to be scary in the playoffs. I'm a Celtics fan, you're a Sixers fan. It'll be fun for the matchup, but I don't want the Celtics playing the Sixers any earlier than the conference finals. You know, it's a scary team. With that being said, you take Embiid, who is an MVP candidate, one of the leading ones. You take a guy like Harden, who, despite what people may tell you, has performed in the playoffs pretty well, especially in those Houston days. You know, I do trust them. And I really think that, you know, if they get the right matchups and, you know, they go in on a hot streak, like they beat the Celtics tonight, they win out the season, something like that, they're still one of the scariest teams, East or West. So although I might put Boston and Milwaukee both over them for who I think is more likely, to say that they can't compete is just ludicrous to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be biased here, but they're still a top 5 team, and I think because, like you said, the Bucks and the Celtics are in the East, a top 5 team, but only being the 3rd in your conference doesn't look amazing, obviously, but they're gonna end up with at this point, I think, unless something crazy happens, they're gonna end up with a Celtics matchup in the 2nd round, and then if they win that, they'll end up against the Bucks, and if they somehow pull it out against both of these teams, which I think they could. I'm not going to give an official prediction now, but there's definitely a chance. I think these obviously going against the Celtics this season, as of right now, they're 0-3. But when we get to the playoffs, everything changes. I'm not that worried about it. It's not like they got blown out every game. But I think those are both going to be competitive series. And I think if they do end up, whoever comes out of this gauntlet, because obviously on the other end, if the Celtics beat the Sixers, they're going to have to go against the Bucks. I think whoever comes out of those 3 teams is going to be really hard to beat in the finals, just because if you look at it, obviously all 3 of those teams are going to have probably an easy first round, I would say, maybe lose a game or 2 at most, but that gets you tuned up, especially for a guy like James Harden that might need it. And then you go into the 2nd round, and you're going to have a dogfight, and then whoever you makes it to the conference finals, it's going to be a dogfight, and they're going to be ready for the finals.
Yeah, and I'll throw a hot take here. You know, I've had the Nuggets as my finals favorites for a long time, and they still do. I'll still keep them there. But whatever team wins the East, especially if they're not up against the Nuggets, find it's going to be very difficult to stop them. Because if the Sixers go out and beat the Celtics and the Bucks in 2 straight series, I don't know what team in the West is matching up with them. And the same could be said in either order for the Bucks and the Celtics. So, I mean, as you mentioned, it's a dogfight out there.
Yeah, and I mean, even the Bucks, I'm still going to stay with my point. They have a really hard second matchup against the Cavs. I think the Cavs are going to take them far, and
Yeah.
depending on how they play, I wouldn't be surprised if the Cavs win. But
The Cavs could
we'll
go all the
save
way.
all of that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just
So
gonna say. I
next,
mean,
we'll talk about Jaylen Brown. Speaking about the Celtics, today and a past few days, it's been talked about that he might leave. He might be looking to explore new options. I think he's a free agent next year, but
yeah, after this one.
um, yeah, but there's still teams that are talking about trading for him, like the Rockets. So I gave my opinion a little earlier, so on the TikTok, but I'll let you start, and then obviously being the Celtics fan.
Yeah, so I think this happens. It's happened pretty much every year, except since Jalen Brown's second year, where, and as he quoted, you know, everybody just wants to break up duos because they're succeeding. There is, from the Celtics perspective, there's absolutely no reason to move on from Jalen Brown. He's been nothing but successful as a player, and this is a team that just made the finals last year and is the 2nd seed in a loaded East right now. So from the Celtics side, there's no reason to move on from him. If I'm Jalen Brown, and I know Jalen Brown has had issues with Celtics fans specifically, and also sometimes the organization, I don't know what you're getting out of this if you go to a team like Houston. And we've talked about this before. We use this guy as an example a lot. Do you want to be Bradley Beal? Like, honestly, and that's something I mentioned in the TikTok earlier. Does If Jalen Brown wants to do a Bradley Beal impression, then by all means the Rockets should trade for him. But there is absolutely no reason for that to happen. You know, the Celtics are a team that's competing for the finals every year since they've had Jalen Brown and Tatum together. They work together very well. And I can't believe we're talking about trading who you claim is the best player on a finals team to the Rockets. I mean, there should be no reason. If Jalen Brown really is that guy, then him and Tatum should easily win it this year. And this shouldn't even be an issue. But I think there's people that doubt the Celtics from the sidelines and build up these narratives with it. And, it could happen, but I think it would be a poor move from both sides.
I'm glad you brought up the Bradley Beal thing because I was waiting. If you forgot about that, I was definitely going to say that. I mean, we've talked about this a million times whenever this comes up. If he goes to a team like Houston, he's a good player. He's going to put up a lot of points by himself, but how good is the team going to be? They're going to be, like you said, the Wizards with Bradley Beal. He can put up 30 points a game, but you make it as the eighth seed in the East, and it doesn't matter. I think he obviously there's always going to be noise, like he said. They always want to break up a duo. But also, I mean, if you have to look at it too, like you said, they've been competing since they were rookies at this point. If they don't win the championship, what else do you have to do? Because obviously you need something else. And I think the only reason why we're also looking at this is the Celtics are going to need to pay people. And that's just how it works. I mean, Marcus Smart, you're going to have to pay. Tatum already got his bag. Robert Williams is an interesting one because he's a really good player, but we don't really know what he's going to be expecting money wise. If you look at it too, a guy like Tobias Harris got a max deal, whether that's good or not at that time. The Sixers obviously invested a lot in him, but the way the NBA is set up right now, I don't think Robert Williams deserves a max, but he's going to want a lot of money too. So that doesn't really leave you with many options around the bench. And that's what we've seen so many years where these teams are going to end up putting money into that core. But I do think Jaylen Brown will stay there. I don't think he's going to leave at all. Like I don't really see him going anywhere else at this point in the near future.
I just want to throw a point in here. And, say what you will about the Celtics having to pay a lot of guys, but they've been managing their money really well so far. Wow. Robert Williams is on a 4-year contract where he's only making 12 million a year. And for Marcus Smart being a perennial, defensive player of the year candidate, his contract really isn't that bad. So with that being said, I know you're gonna have to pay Jalen, but we're in an NBA where money barely even matters anymore. You can't move on from a guy who, and I'll even say it, is the Celtics' best player, a, a couple times a week. He really is the guy. If you move on from Jaylen Brown, there's nothing you can get back that's going to reflect his play style. There are plenty of players better than Jaylen Brown, but he's one of the best. I think he's a top 3 shooting guard in the league. If you move on from Jaylen Brown, how do you go up at the position? Teams, the best other shooting guards in the league, we're looking at guys like Devin Booker, Donovan Mitchell. Those aren't teams that Jaylen Brown would go to, and those aren't guys the Celtics could get back. The only possible solution, if a trade happened with Jaylen Brown, would be to get younger like prospects, like rookies back. But that doesn't even fit the Celtics timeline. I think when Jaylen Brown goes, the ship kind of sails. So if I'm the Celtics, I'm looking to extend Jaylen Brown being here as long as possible because when he's gone, you can't guarantee success after that.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, it's basically like when Shaq and Kobe broke up. You're gonna have Tatum, obviously being Kobe, like no one else would be. He's gonna just be putting up, I mean, 50 shots a game? Because who else on that team are you gonna have Peyton Pritchard be the starting two guard? Like, it doesn't
Let
really make sense. And if they, obviously, like you said, I think not even young players. If they trade with the Rockets, they're getting picks and they're going to end up with obviously probably like 4 or 5 first round picks just because the Rockets have so many. I think they have the second most first round picks in the next like 10 years. But like you said, fitting into the timeline, you're going to have Tatum, who's still young, obviously, but getting older every year. You can't just wait for these players to come in and then also develop. So I don't think Jaylen Brown leaves anytime soon unless something big happens. But if we look at it, if they don't win the championship this year or next year, and he's going to be a free agent next year, we'll talk about it then. But I think that would be interesting.
Yeah.
And speaking of money, we'll move into the NBA recently signed a new CBA. And the first thing that I want to talk about is that their players are now going to have to play 65 games to be considered for awards. This is also, besides MVP, it's going to be Rookie of the Year, All NBA, All Star. I'm not sure about the All Star. I think they're still trying to work out because obviously that's halfway through the season. But This is interesting, mostly money-wise, because a lot of guys, the way that contracts are set up and maxes are set up, you have to be, like, qualified for all NBA teams and stuff like that. So the NBA essentially is pushing this just to make more guys play more often. 65 games might seem a little low, especially with 82 games, and, obviously, Bill Russell played 82 games every single year. That's just what they used to do, and the kids these days can't even play 50 games. But I just wanna hear your initial thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, Bill Russell played half his career without even an 82 game season, but he's tough. He was built different. Um, I will say I actually do like this. When I see, maybe this is just me generally not being optimistic. When I see rule changes in CBA stuff, I get a little nervous most of the time. I think 65 is fair because it means that if you're a star player that's going for the awards, you do have to play, but it allows a guy to, be injured for a couple weeks and still be able to figure it out. I do think it's fair. I also really appreciate how the all NBA teams are positionless. I think that's really big because your guy Embiid has been kind of getting screwed out of the first team every year because Jokic has been so solid these last couple of years at center. They're the two best players in the league for some of the last couple of years running. They should both be getting all NBA first teams. And I don't really see a way to complain about that. I don't know why you'd want better players on lower teams. So overall, I'm feeling pretty good about some of the changes. How do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, even with Embiid obviously in mind, I think we've had a lot of years, even before we kinda saw this rise of Giannis, Embiid, and Jokic, we saw a lot of years where the 3, 4, even 5 best guys in the league were guards when we had guys like Curry and Harden and all those guys playing really well. So I think it's good overall. I mean, the All NBA team is obviously, prestigious, obvious not as prestigious as, like, the MVP and a lot of these guys going for championships and stuff, but when we look at players who aren't in a very good scenario like Dame for most of his career, all NBA teams are kind of the main thing that you look at for a guy like that because all-stars really don't matter that much, but all NBA teams, I think it's good. We're gonna have the 5 best guys on and I guess the 15 best guys overall with all 3 teams. So I think it's good to see that. Another thing that I wanna bring up, both of us are not huge fans of the play-in tournament, but now they're gonna have an in-season play-in tournament. So essentially what it's going to be is there's going to be pool play and then there's going to be the 8 top teams advancing to like a single elimination tournament and the final 4 is going to be a neutral site and the winning team and coach gets money. It seems like there's not really going to be any incentives or anything based on this. So with all that in mind, how do you think?
I hate it. I really hate it because it's even less useful than the plan. You know, if you've listened to us talk before, we both complain about the plan because I think it's a little extra. I think it's just a money grab at the end of the day. I don't think there should be 10 seeds that can make the playoffs. So this is even less useful because it means literally nothing. You know, I hate the idea that the incentive for these millionaires and a couple of them billionaires would be money. You think LeBron's gonna play a couple extra games because of money? If you told LeBron that it gets some like playoff positioning or something, he'd be dropping 40 every game. There is no real incentive. It's again just a money grab. So I get why the NBA does stuff like this, but it's not fun for me. Like I don't care. If the Celtics win the in-season play-in tournament, I'm not going to be posting about them on Instagram. Like, the goal of an NBA season is to win a finals. Are people gonna like be looking at this in 20 years and saying, "Oh, Dame never won that MVP. He never won a ring, but god damn, he won the in-season play-in tournament with the Trailblazers." Like, what is the? It's not prestigious. It doesn't excite me. So, I mean, I'd love to hear your opinions on it, but if you couldn't tell, I'm not feeling it.
Well, actually Dame did win an MVP. He won the in-season bubble MVP.
Bubble MVP. Right, right, right.
So I mean, this tournament just doesn't make any sense to me. I guess money wise, that's all they really care about at this point. But if there's no incentive, and I don't think you really can have an incentive with this, like, because then if you have, like you said, playoff positioning, which would make sense, like you're having a tournament, but then the team's just not going to play for the rest of the season. So it doesn't really matter. So I think overall, like the NBA is set up where there's no reason to change the way that it is. The only thing that they could really do is get rid of games. Like if they had a 65 game season, then we see more competition and stuff like that. So I don't understand why they want to add this in-season tournament. It would replace a few regular season games. So every team would still end up playing 82 games, except for the two championship teams. They would play an extra game. But I mean, with all this being said, what does it really matter? Are these guys going to compete? Like they're competing for what? Probably like $500,000. And the only guys that are really going to benefit from that are the bench guys. And even then, they're not going to play. So it doesn't really matter to them. And even with the play in tournament, this, like you said, this means even less. So I'm not a fan of it at all.
One thing I will say, and this is just kind of an idea that I've been thinking about once I looked at the notes. If they are going to do an in-season play-in tournament, something like this, why don't they make whoever wins get a guaranteed playoff spot? Doesn't matter, and then it goes off record off of that. If a team like the Rockets somehow wins it, all right, they'll get the eighth seed in the West, no matter what. Something crazy like that. If these guys are being told they have to go all out because it's a playing tournament and dudes are going to be rushing back from injuries, coaches are going to be getting like 7-man tight rotations, make it matter. If we're going to hype this up like it's end all be all, let's actually get a reward for winning it, because the fact of the matter is it's going to quickly become something nobody cares about if it stays like this.
Yeah, and they said we might even see it next season. So unless they start changing it too with incentives, I don't even know what the incentive would be. Just because I mean, 82 games. I think the only way that you make it better is to even chop it down a little bit. But obviously, both of us are not big fans of this idea. And before we end the NBA, we're going to save until next week our official predictions for the playoffs and the awards, just because we're kind of a week away and next week we'll officially have all the seating and everything. So then we can talk about all that. We can talk about the rookie of the year. I'm pretty sure most of our awards that we've talked about last week are going to be the same. There's not really much of a debate for most of them. There is for one, though, obviously the MVP. We have three guys at this point. The leading scorer in the NBA, a top 3 seed in the East, arguably the best player on the best team, and a guy who's averaging a triple double on the number 1 seed in the West. So we'll get into it next week, officially with all that and our playoff talk. But staying in basketball before we move over to football, I want to talk about the college basketball championship game that happened. I think it was yesterday as of our recording. UConn obviously beating San Diego State University in a pretty lopsided game overall. So what are your first initial thoughts about this?
Yeah, and I was talking on the TikTok about how San Diego State, I had a feeling they could win. And then I watched the game and I'm like, all right, my whole setup was to say why UConn was so good, but then say why I have the feeling about San Diego State. UConn won for all the reasons that they were supposed to win. They play suffocating defense. Everybody, I'm watching the game with my friends. San Diego State's putting up shots. Everybody's like, oh, why are they putting up these bad shots? Because UConn's draining the first 25 seconds of the shot clock on defense. They can't get shots. So the defense was incredible. The offense actually started pretty slow, but the second half, I'm pretty sure it was Brantley that went up for a dunk and missed it off the back rim. The second he even put that up, I'm like, okay, they're going to win. They had too much swagger. They had too much going on for them. San Diego State just came out flat. And if I can be honest, I like San Diego State quite a bit, but they've benefited off teams they play also coming out flat. That's how they beat Alabama. That's how they beat FAU, because when FAU started hitting threes in the second half, that's when they needed to come back and get game winners and stuff. So overall, UConn was the best team in the tournament, clearly. It's not something I predicted. It's not something you predicted. Most people wouldn't. But I mean, they were unstoppable. You can't knock them because they killed every team in front of them. So I know people are going to call it boring. It wasn't the most exciting national championship game ever, but at least I can confidently come on here and say the best team won. So
Yeah.
I do appreciate that to an extent.
So my question coming out of this is, would you consider UConn a blue blood at this point? 5 championships since 1999, and obviously some storied history.
Yeah, so When it comes to stuff like this, usually in all sports, I'm not a traditionalist. I'm very like let the new stuff go. But I can't. I think it doesn't even really matter how good they are now because if we're talking about who's been the best team in the last 25 years, it's UConn, simply. But the Blue Bloods to me are probably always going to be Duke, UCLA, Kansas, UNC. And it's just kind of how it goes. It's how it's always been. And I really like UConn and them having a spectacular historical women's team really helps. But if we're talking historically before the last 25 years, UConn wasn't really all that. I really like the team. It's, one of my favorite college basketball schools to root for. But when it comes to Blue Bloods, I got to be pretty traditional. What are your feelings on that?
So I guess once this comes out, I'll already have the TikTok out about this. That's just why I wanted to ask you first. But essentially, I think they're in the tier right below. There's a lot of teams kind of in that tier. Like you said, I think UCLA hasn't been great over the past few years, but I mean, they still made the Final Four a few years ago. And historically, what, 13 championships, like their historic program. Duke, obviously, up there too. UNC, Kentucky, and one that's kind of on the edge, and I would kind of have them in that lower tier with UConn is Indiana. I know some people have them in the blue blood tier. They're kind of on the edge, and I see UConn like that. I think they're both still, I guess, historically, Indiana has a little more history, I would say. But I think they're both kind of a tier below, but they're still obviously kind of that second breed.
Yeah, and I can respect that. I mean, Indiana has had historic seasons. I think they're kind of they're. I would put them in the same tier as UConn. I like that, but almost in reverse order. Indiana was really killing it, and there was a time, maybe 15, 20 years ago, where you could vouch for Indiana being there. But with the recent success, I know they were pretty good this year, but they haven't really shown anything blue blood worthy. While Connecticut, a while ago wasn't even really close, but we're talking the last 25 years, they're dominant. So I agree with you there. I would put them in the same tier on my list as well.
Yeah. I know you said you had four blue bloods. I personally have five. I would say Kentucky, UCLA, UNC, Kansas, and Duke are like my top five.
I think Kentucky is fair enough. I If I had to pick a fifth team, they would be my fifth team, but I really would just put Kansas there and not Kentucky. And that's kind of a
Yeah.
hot take, but
So next we'll go into the NFL. We're just going to start basically right off the bat. We have another mock draft as of right now. We're going to have a lot more position posts coming out now with the draft season picking up. So I guess we'll just start off right away with our draft. Um, First two picks, pretty similar, I would hope. CJ Stroud going to the Panthers and Bryce Young going to the Texans, unless you have anything different.
no, I wanted to put Bryce Young up there. I don't want to spoil positional rankings, but he's probably still, hanging in that QB1 spot for me. But just with the fit and everything we know so far, CJ Stroud, then Bryce Young.
All right. So then we'll start at three. You can start.
Yeah. At third, we've been mocking this for a while. I'll keep Will Anderson going to the Cardinals.
At three, I have a trade. I kind of wanted to go a little out of left field for this one. So I have the Titans trading up for the third pick to draft Anthony Richardson. I've been seeing a little bit of pickup on this, especially as of today, as we're recording this recently. I actually went through and I saw three mock drafts out of, I think I looked at five today, all that came out today, mocking the Titans to trade up. And I think the prospect of them trading up is good. Obviously, they have Ryan Tannehill and who's Malik
Malik
Willis on
Willis.
the roster. And I like Malik Willis, but I mean, you can't. I don't think he's really an NFL level starter. Obviously, a good college player, but I like the idea of Anthony Richardson here trading up for that. Another team that a lot of people have been mocking up for a trade is the Raiders at three, and I could definitely see that happening too to jump the Colts. But I think the Titans trading up here take Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, and that would be a crazy move. I mean, that would be Indy's worst nightmare. For me, Anthony Richardson's still on the board. I think he fits well in Indy as well, so I'd have him there.
So Indianapolis ends up with Will Levis in my trade, and I have four quarterbacks in the top four.
It's crazy how we're at this late in the mock draft season, and that feels like it could happen. Usually, that's very early mock draft sort of stuff, but it's wild. With
I
that
mean,
being
even
said,
too with the Raiders, if they end up trading up for that third pick, I think it's
yeah,
very possible.
I honestly, my mock draft reflects a little bit different, but that could really happen. At 5, I have Seattle, and I have them taking Tyree Wilson.
At 5, with the 4 quarterbacks going 1 through 4, I think the Seahawks take the best player in the draft at 5 with Will Anderson.
Yeah. At 6, this is where I have Tennessee trading up. I think they see the board, they see Vegas, they need to jump Vegas. Uh, so I have Tennessee trading up to 6 and taking Will Levis.
At 6, I have the Lions taking Jalen Carter. He fell a little bit. Obviously, with all the quarterbacks at the top, my board's going to be a little more uh, loaded towards the front of the first round.
Yeah. For me at 7, I have Las Vegas. They have no QBs left. Tyree Wilson's off the board. Will Anderson's off the board. I think they go for corner and take Christian Gonzalez.
So same scenario for me. Vegas, obviously, with no quarterbacks at this point, and signing Jimmy Garoppolo. We've talked about this. I think they could wait another year for quarterback. So I have them taking Broderick Jones here. I was thinking also with the cornerback position too. That was my first initial thought, but they have a lot they need to fill. So I think they just pretty much take best player available at this point, and I think Broderick Jones is.
I respect that. At 8, I stopped the skid. I think Jalen Carter stays in the same state. I have the Falcons taking him.
I have the Falcons taking Tyree Wilson, another defensive player.
Yeah. At 9, we've talked about this before. When Chicago traded down, we assume they're going O line. I had Paris Johnson here.
I have the same pick.
Yep. And at 10, I don't think he could go down any farther. I think the Eagles take Joey Porter.
So in my scenario, Christian Gonzalez doesn't end up getting traded or picked within the first 9 picks. So I really like the fit with Joey Porter, but I think since Gonzalez is still there and still the number 1 corner in a lot of people's drafts, I like Porter more, but I think the Eagles take Gonzalez.
Fair enough. So I had the Lions trading down earlier with the Titans. So here they are at 11. I like Lucas Van Ness on the opposite side of Hutch. I think that'll be a great pick.
So I have the Cardinals here trading down from the 3 pick, and I think they get Peter Skoronski here. Obviously missing out on a lot of players at the 3 pick, but still getting a great player at this point.
Yeah, and people complain about Kyler's height being an issue. You take a really stud, like a stud offensive lineman that's shorter, it's kind of best case scenario. So at 12, I have Houston taking their wide receiver 1, who I have Jackson Smith and Jigba.
I still have Houston taking Quentin Johnston at this point.
Yeah. At 13, the Jets see Skoronski on the board in my mock, and they take him.
I have the Jets taking Devon Witherspoon because obviously with Johnson, Skoronski, and Jones out at this point, I think they have to go in a different direction.
Yeah. And at 14, I'm a big Witherspoon guy. I'd be really happy if my Patriots got him. I would have them taking him.
I have the Patriots taking Jackson Smith and Jigba. It was really close between him and Jordan Addison, but I think the Patriots historically kind of like the smaller slot receiver guy.
Yeah. And Jigba gives a lot of Edelman vibes too, so that would make a lot of sense. 15, Quinn Johnson still on the board. Rodgers would be gone, but I think the Packers get a receiver for Jordan Love, so Quinn Johnson at 15.
I was toying with the idea. Obviously, I still have Jordan Addison available, but I'm going to stick with the Packers not drafting a wide receiver in the first round ever. So I think they're going to take Michael Mayer here. I don't think he's the best tight end in the draft, but I think he fits well on the Packers.
Yeah. At 16, I have a guy that went a lot earlier in yours. He's rising up draft boards as a tackle. Washington could use him. I have Broderick Jones.
I have Washington taking Joey Porter Jr.
Yeah. At 17, I think Pittsburgh's mad that Jones just went off the board. They really need a corner. I have them taking Deontay Banks.
I have them taking another defensive player in Brian Branch.
18, I have Detroit staying strong. They got Lucas Van Ness earlier. I think they get Michael Mayer to replace Hawkinson here.
So I had them taking Jalen Carter earlier. So I think they flip over to the offensive side and get Jordan Addison.
Hmm. 19, the Buccaneers kind of need everything. I have them taking Nolan Smith.
Like you said, I think they need everything. I have them taking Kalijah Kancey.
Yeah. 20, I think a receiver that would fit really well with Lockett and Metcalf would be Zay Flowers for Seattle.
I think Seattle is in a point where they need interior offensive line, and I think Osiris Torrance is. I know he's mocked down a little bit for some people, but I think he's definitely a first round talent.
Yeah. I have my last trade up at 21. I think, it's the best player on the board, and Buffalo really could still use a running back, a surefire running back one. I think the Bills trade up at 21 for Bijan Robinson.
So I have the Chargers staying here, and I have them taking Deontay Banks.
Yep. 22, Jordan Addison still on my board. I have the Ravens taking Jordan Addison.
I have the Ravens taking another receiver, but the best one available still is Zay Flowers.
23, I have your guy Kalijah Kancey filling up DT in Minnesota.
I have Minnesota taking Cam Smith out of South Carolina.
That's my guy. 24, best player available, Jaguars take Brian Branch.
Same thing for me. I think the Jaguars take the best available, and they take Lucas Van Ness.
25, I got the first time I'm not disrespecting the Giants. I think they could use an interior O lineman. I think Osiris Torrance is a really good player, still on the board. No brainer for me.
I like that. He fell in my board, and I'm very happy that the Giants can take him. I don't know if they would at this point, but I have them taking Nolan Smith.
26, the Cowboys love to reach on skills positions. I have them taking Jalen Hyatt out of Tennessee.
I agree that they like to reach on skill positions, but skill position player fell to them at this point, so I have them taking Bijan.
27, this is where the Chargers are traded down for me. I think they get the same player that would have taken at 21. I have them taking Brian Brzee.
I have the Bills taking Emmanuel Forbes. I think they need defensive back a lot.
Yeah. 28, I've been mocking offensive linemen to the Bengals for a long time, but now they actually have too many, so they got to attack a different position. I have them taking Cam Smith out of South Carolina.
I have them taking Dalton Kincaid.
Yeah. At 29, I have the Saints taking Miles Murphy out of Clemson. I think they need another edge rusher.
I have the Saints taking Brian Brzee.
At 30, I have the Eagles taking a guy I usually haven't had mocked in the first round. I'm going to try to get his name right. Adamor, the edge rusher out of Northwestern. I think he's a really good player. I still got to catch up on how to say his name.
I have the Eagles. Obviously, they're in a position where they could take pretty much any position. Obviously, they have a lot of good players, but losing some players on defense, I think they take wide receiver at this point in Josh Downs.
Yeah, at 31, I think Kansas City's happy to have a tackle on the board. I have them taking Darnell Wright.
And I have Kansas City taking the best player left in my draft with a D lineman out of Baylor. Siaka, Ika, maybe.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. So I think overall, the mock drafts, it's kind of interesting to look at, like you said. There's still a possibility, and I think personally I have the Titans at 3 in this, but like I said earlier, I think the Raiders can definitely make a move, and it's going to be interesting because we don't really know. We both like Anthony Richardson more, but we don't know what these NFL teams feel about these quarterbacks at this point, and especially with teams that are sneaky to trade up too. There's a lot of possibilities that we could see today. I saw the possibility that the Patriots could take a quarterback. I don't know how I feel about that, but if Anthony Richardson does fall and teams don't really like him, that's what I saw. I don't think that happens, but if that were to happen, I mean, with Mac Jones, I don't really need to think about it too much. I don't think it does happen, but if he gets to 14, that would be an interesting spot for them.
If he gets to 14, it's going to be the whole Lamar Jackson 2018 draft all over again. You're going to be screaming at the TV for the pass to take him, and they still won't.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot left. There's still 3 weeks until the draft, so we're going to have a lot of different movement just because we're going to see teams being a little more aggressive in the trade market now. we usually wait until draft night for teams to officially make these trades, but a lot of teams already kind of have it mocked out before. So we might see even like 5 or 6 trades in the first round at this point. I think there's going to be a lot of trades. I didn't mock any down the board just because I kind of like after the first 10 picks, I kind of just go with best player available or whatever they need. But I'm not saying that there's not going to be trades. I think there definitely will be trades. We see it every single year, especially if a player falls that a team really likes.
Yeah.
So speaking of trades on draft night, there's been some speculation that Lamar Jackson could get traded on draft night. I think this would be interesting, especially with a team that would contend for it. That we can see, obviously, in the upper part of the draft, the Lions have been one of the teams that people are looking at. The Falcons, both in the top 10. So that would be interesting. Obviously, putting the Ravens with a top 10 pick, that changes their draft a lot. I personally have them taking Zay Flowers at 22, but if they get in the top 6 and or even the top 10, it'll be interesting to look at, especially quarterback wise.
Yeah. And I'm not going to go too into this. We talked a lot about Lamar last episode. If you ask my opinion, I don't think he's going to get traded on draft day just because of the leverage and the contract things. It would be a hard sell for a team to trade for him on draft night. I think it's going to be a decision that comes after draft or even sooner, like by the time we put out this episode. Like, I think it's right around the corner or it's going to take a while. I think the draft just kind of serves as a landmark as of now.
Yeah. So overall, not that much to talk about this week just because the NBA is kind of wrapping up. But next week, we'll have a lot to talk about with our NBA awards, official playoff predictions. We will have the play-in going on next week, so that'll be a little interesting. But I don't really expect any of the play-in teams to make that much noise in the playoffs, so I don't think it'll change our brackets that much. But we'll have that, and we'll probably have a little more solidified picks for the draft, depending on what happens if any teams trade up. So, with all that being said, thank you guys for watching this episode, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.